are now just 6 weeks away from the 2024 presidential election. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are on the campaign trail, looking, of course, to sway undecided voters.
Yeah, we have team coverage for you on the hotly contested race for the White House. NBC10 Boston political analyst Sue O'Connell is going to join us in a moment. But we're going to start with political reporter Matt Pritchard in studio with us. Matt, where are the candidates focusing their efforts right now?
Yeah, Corey, JC, attention is fixed on battleground states. Both candidates are prioritizing 7 key areas and simultaneously keeping an eye on polling every step of the way. On the rally stage,
we just had 4 years of that. We can't have another 4 years. Not going to happen.
Or out on the tarmac.
I believe in what we can create in terms of opportunity for the American people.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are busy crisscrossing the country in the election's final days, digesting 2 recent polls, one from NBC News and the other published by the New York Times and Siena College.
This election cycle is a little more unique than previous elections.
Polling experts are combing over the ever-shifting data.
What we're seeing this year is a lot of movement in the numbers since Harris has entered the race.
Weighing top-line findings that, on the one hand, show Kamala Harris with a 5% lead among registered voters nationally, and on the other, Donald Trump leading the current vice president in key battleground states like Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina.
Even though your candidate might be leading by 2 or 3 points or trailing by 2 or 3 points in a state, generally those all fall within the poll's margin of error and should be seen as not statistically significant.
For political strategists,
people's behavior is consistently ahead of the polling, and we're always trying to catch up.
I'm not paying attention to the general, like she's up 2 points and he's down 6. None of that. I want to know about specifics.
They're holding the polls at arm's length, focusing on what each candidate needs to do over the next 42 days.
I think she should do some more interviews. I think people need to get the warm hug from her.
He needs to talk about policy. He needs to talk about immigration. He needs to talk about the economy.
And this week, Trump will visit Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Kamala Harris scheduled to visit Pennsylvania, along with the southern border in Arizona. In the studio, Matt Pritchard, NBC10 Boston.
All right, Matt, thank you. NBC 10 political commentator Sue O'Connell joining us now. Sue, I want to ask you about a question that former President Donald Trump was asked recently. It was on Sunday. He was asked if he'd consider to run again in 2028 if he loses to Harris in November, and he said no. Now, we're getting way ahead of ourselves because obviously Trump can still win in November, so this won't even be a factor. But if he doesn't, what does the Republican Party look like without Donald Trump leading it?
That's a good question, JC. So 2 things may happen, or we will be where we are today with a civil war raging within the Republican Party. If Trump doesn't win, an emphasis on and he continues to meddle in the Republican Party, that's going to be very different. Remember, most former presidents only are out for big elections. We rarely ever see them. So if he doesn't meddle, the party could be led by J.D. Vance, who at the moment is the heir apparent. Would a less problematic leader boost Trumpism more successfully without Trump? Who knows? But as of right now, hundreds of Republican leaders have endorsed Harris, not because of her policies, but to stop Donald Trump. If Donald Trump doesn't win and then doesn't engage and meddle afterwards, those Republicans could return to the party and try and purge Trumpism. Now, the biggest variable here is how Trump will act, and that, of course, makes it all just too difficult to predict.
Well, Sue, Trump has spoken a lot about tariffs in the race. Just yesterday, he threatened John Deere, which is that big company, with 200% tariffs if it sold tractors made in Mexico here in the U.S. Without getting too deep here, just give us a brief, what are tariffs and how they're set and why Trump thinks they're the answer to most of the problems that this country has.
Well, as you know, JC, since I need math help on a regular basis from you and you're my office roomie, I'm not an economist, but I think I understand how tariffs work better than Donald Trump does. Simply, tariff is a fancy word for a tax. It's a tax that the United States charges a foreign country on a good or service that's imported into the United States. So, for example, the United States might charge a tariff on corn imported from Mexico. And they do that in order to make that corn more expensive so we can protect our United States corn farmers. The cost of that tariff, you know where that goes, that gets passed on to consumers, you and me. So we might choose American-grown corn instead of Mexican-grown corn, right? Tariffs, experts say, should be used surgically, not broadly, because if you have too many tariffs, it could lead to other countries charging a tariff on United States imports, and that could cause inflation here. Now, Trump has also pledged to impose a 10% tariff on all products and services imported into the United States. I couldn't find one economist who thinks that's a good idea.
All right, Sue, before we let you go, there's just a week until J.D. Vance and Tim Walz meet to debate. So if you were counseling each side, what would you be saying to them?
So I think both candidates for vice president will be very prepared, and we may take more away from this debate in total than we did from the presidential debate. The first rule for every vice president, do no harm. Now, Senator J.D. Vance, he's got a tougher job than Governor Tim Walz because he's better known and, frankly, isn't as popular and has more negative ratings than Walz does. Vance, and I mean this sincerely, needs to be not creepy, and I'm not being snarky here. If he wants to win over undecideds or Democrats who don't want to vote for Harris, he has to stop saying creepy things about women, single women, and women who don't have children. Now, for Walz, he needs to make a very good first impression on voters. Remember, many didn't know much about Harris, and she was vice president, and many more don't know much about Walz. Walz also has to successfully respond to charges I'm sure Vance will bring about his military service claims.
It'll be the first time we're seeing both like that in that light up on a debate stage.
Yep.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting. Thank you, as always. And for a deeper dive into the political headlines each week, tune into At Issue with Corey Smith here, Sue O'Connell, and Matt Pritchard. It airs every Sunday morning at 11:30 after Meet the Press right here on NBC10 Boston.